I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are holding two completely different blueprints for building human civilization.
Oh, that's a great way to frame it.
Right. So you've got one in your left hand, and it's drawn by a mystic. And this architect believes that the entire goal of society is divine perfection.
Like absolute purity.
Exactly. Every single line on the page is pointing upwards. It's urging us to overcome our base desires, to completely transcend our biology and reach this incredible celestial ideal.
Which is breathtaking, but also, terrifying.
Oh, totally terrifying. It demands absolute moral purity. But then, in your right hand, you have another blueprint. And this one is drawn by a pragmatist.
A very different kind of thinker.
Yeah, a thinker who looks at human society with the cold, hard, calculating gaze of, like, a physicist.
Right.
This blueprint doesn't care at all about what we should be. It cares entirely about why we are the way we are based on, the climate we live in, the geography we navigate, and even the literal moisture content of the food we eat.
Which is just, it is the ultimate human tension, really.
Yeah, it really is.
The clash between our soaring, idealistic aspirations and the grounded biological realities of our everyday existence. And what is so deeply fascinating is that this tension isn't some modern post-Enlightenment invention.
Right. It goes way back.
Yeah, it is the defining feature of a monumental intellectual evolution that took place centuries ago within Muslim philosophy.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive.
We are talking about an era where the stakes of understanding human nature were nothing less than the survival of empires and, well, the salvation of the soul.
Today, we are tracing this thrilling detective story of ideas by looking at two towering figures and the source chapters that document their incredibly different worldviews.
It's going to be a wild ride.
We're going to start by exploring the mind of Jalal al-Din Dawwani. He's a 15th century philosopher, a judge, and a mystic who wanted to turn humanity into nothing less than the vicegerents of God.
A massive undertaking.
Yeah, and once we understand that soaring ideal, we are going to pivot to Ibn Khaldun, who is this legendary historian who took the study of humanity and radically grounded it.
He basically turned history from a collection of campfire stories into a hard natural science.
We are unpacking a massive paradigm shift today, right? We will see how classical philosophy was first elevated into this mystical pursuit of divine reflection under Dawwani, and then how it was brought crashing back down to earth by Ibn Khaldun.
And brought down in the best, most scientifically rigorous way possible, I should add.
For sure.
He argued that human culture isn't just a moral playground. It follows observable, unforgiving laws of nature.
If we look at the overarching journey here, it's really the transition from asking, how do we achieve ultimate moral perfection, to asking, what are the undeniable physical laws that actually dictate human behavior?
Exactly. It's a total shift in the foundational question.
Okay, so let's unpack this journey, starting with our mystic Dawwani. To understand his mind, we really need to know his world.
We do. Context is everything here.
He was born in 1427 and died around 1501 or 1502. And he came from a place called Dawwan in the district of Qazarun.
Right.
His father was a qadi, which is an Islamic judge, meaning Dawwani essentially grew up breathing the law.
Yeah, the law was the family business.
He gets this elite education in theology at Shiraz, becomes a professor, and eventually rises to an incredibly prominent position. He becomes the qadi of the court for the Turkish ruler Hasan Beg Khan Bahadur, who is often known in history as Uzun Hasan, and later for Sultan Yaqub.
So we're not talking about some isolated monk in a cave here.
Not at all. This is a man of the law, a man of the royal court, actively navigating the intense politics of the 15th century. But fundamentally, he is a philosopher at heart.
And that political context is crucial because Dawwani's philosophical impact is a direct response to his era. The source material points out a really elegant historical parallel here.
Oh, right, with the Mongol period.
Yeah. If you look back to the Mongol period, which was just incredibly destructive and chaotic, a thinker named Tusi managed to revive classical philosophy by leaning heavily on the rational, highly structured thought of Avicenna, or Ibn Sina.
Right, so Tusi basically used Avicenna to build an intellectual fortress against all that chaos.
Exactly. And fast forward to Dawwani in the Ottoman period, and he plays a remarkably similar role of revivalist. But Dawwani's flavor is different.
Yeah, so.
He revives philosophy using what is called illuminative philosophy, or hikmat-i Ishrāqī, which originates from the 12th century philosopher Suhrawardi.
Let's pause right there because illuminative philosophy sounds beautiful, but what does it actually mean in practice? Are we talking literally about light, or is this a metaphor?
Well, it's a profound metaphysical system where light is both a metaphor and the ultimate reality.
Okay, break that down for me.
In Suhrawardi's illuminative philosophy, God is the light of lights. Everything in the universe, from the angels to the human intellect down to the physical rocks on the ground, exists on a spectrum of luminosity.
So everything has some degree of light.
Yes, the closer you are to God, the more light or pure being you possess. Darkness isn't a thing in itself. It's literally just the absence of light.
Wow. Okay.
So when Dawwani revives this, he isn't just maintaining the dry Aristotelian status quo of categorizing things. He is injecting this deeply mystical, intuitive, light-driven vision back into the forefront of intellectual life. He wants to illuminate the mind, not just organize it.
And he was insanely prolific while doing it, too. The sources mention he wrote 70 extant works.
70.
Right. Imagine writing 70 books by hand while serving as a Supreme Court judge.
It's hard to fathom.
But the big one, the text that cements his legacy and the one we are really focusing on today, is an ethical treatise called the Akhlaq-i Jalali.
Yes, that's the masterpiece.
And it was specifically commissioned by the ruler Hassan Beg. The ruler's instructions were fascinating. He basically handed Dawwani Tusi's earlier masterpiece on ethics and said, I want you to correct and complete this.
That is a staggering mandate to receive from a king.
Right. Just casually fix the greatest philosophical work of the last era.
Because Tusi's work, the Akhlaq-i Jalali, was structurally brilliant. It was the gold standard, based heavily on Greek-inspired philosophy. Plato, Aristotle, the Neoplatonists.
It was very structured.
Yeah, it was a massive rational architecture of how a human being should act. But Dawwani's execution of Hassan Beg's mandate is where his specific genius really shines.
What did he do differently?
The sources describe how he didn't just edit Tusi, he artistically ornamented this pre-existing structure. He took this Greek rationalism and wove in Quranic verses, precepts of the Prophet Muhammad and his companions, and the deeply moving, sometimes ecstatic utterances of the Sufi mystics.
It's kind of like he's a master music producer.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Think of Tusi's ethics as this dense, incredibly complex, but maybe slightly dry classical track. Dawwani gets the stems to this track and decides to remix it for a new era.
Right, right.
He doesn't destroy the original melody. The logical structure is all still there. But he brings in this soaring string section of Sufi mysticism and then drops in the heavy, authoritative bass line of Quranic scripture.
That is a perfect way to visualize it.
Suddenly, he's turned a classical piece into this emotionally resonant, epic symphony that perfectly captured the Ottoman zeitgeist. He synthesized entirely different worldviews, Greek logic and Islamic revelation, into one cohesive masterpiece.
You're hitting on the exact mechanism of his success there.
Yeah.
He wasn't just blindly translating or copying. He was actively harmonizing rationalism with revelation and mystical intuition.
It's a delicate balance.
Very. The sources actually note that he abbreviated and simplified Tusi, where the logic was just too bogged down in the weeds, but he amplified the text wherever it could be bathed in the light of this illuminative philosophy.
So he edited for emotional impact, in a way.
His ultimate goal was to prove that the philosopher, who relies on deduction, and the mystic, who relies on direct experience, aren't enemies at all. They are actually walking toward the exact same truth.
And that truth, the core of Dawwani's entire project, is answering the oldest human question. Why are we here, and how should we act? Which brings us right to the razor's edge of his morality.
This is where it gets really intense.
Yeah, here is where the source material gets incredible. If you read Aristotle, or even the early Muslim moralists who followed him, like Ibn Khaldun or even Tusi initially, they all circle around this concept of ultimate happiness as the highest good.
The summum bonum.
Right. The idea that a virtuous life naturally leads to a happy, flourishing life. But Dawwani looks at that and says, no, that's setting the bar way too low.
He essentially argues that the Aristotelian concept of happiness, while logical, completely misses the heavenly, the Qudsi element that is essential to human existence.
It's too mundane for him.
Exactly. A well-adjusted, happy citizen in a Greek city-state is fine, but it's not the ultimate purpose of the cosmos. Dawwani takes a radical step and completely collapses the boundary between the moral ideal and the religious ideal.
So what is the highest good for him, if not happiness?
For him, the highest good isn't human happiness at all. It is the vicegerency of God, khilafati ilahi.
The vicegerency of God, meaning humans are quite literally meant to be God's representatives, his deputies, managing the earth on his behalf.
That is the immense weight he places on our shoulders.
It's heavy.
It is. His moral theory is based entirely on the position of man in the universe, as determined by God, not by man himself. He argues that the Quran evaluates knowledge and appreciates power strictly with this specific goal in mind.
So we have a cosmic job description.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Therefore, the ultimate inspiring ideal for what he calls the noblest of the creation cannot just be feeling content or being a good neighbor. It must be stepping into this terrifyingly grand role of divine vicegerency.
But immediately that raises a massive logical problem.
Just a bit.
Look at us. We are flawed, stumbling, selfish creatures. What possibly entitles us to this incredibly high office of cosmic responsibility?
Right, why us?
Dawwani answers this by quoting a famous saying from the Caliph Ali, and it is just a breathtaking piece of psychology. Caliph Ali said that God created angels with pure intellect, but completely without desire, anger, or ire.
They have no temptations whatsoever.
None. And because they don't have desires, they don't have free choice. They are perfect by their very nature, which means they're actually above morality.
Right, they don't have to earn their goodness. They just are good.
And then on the absolute opposite end of the spectrum, you have the brutes, the animals. God created them with desire and ire, but they lack intellect.
They're completely enslaved by their irrational impulses.
Exactly. Therefore, they are below morality. You cannot hold a lion morally accountable for hunting and eating a gazelle. It completely lacks the intellectual machinery to deliberate or choose otherwise. It's just acting out its programming.
But man is a creature right in the middle. We are this volatile, explosive combination of both.
We really are.
We have the soaring intellect of the angels, and we have the raging primal desires of the brutes. Dawwani says that because we have both, we have a choice.
It's a burden of choice.
Yes. We can rise above the angels if we actively choose to subordinate our animal desires to our divine intellect. But we can also sink below the brutes if we let our desires enslave our intellect, using our smarts just to invent new, cruel ways to satisfy our base urges.
Taking that further, I mean, this framework completely redefines the struggle of being human. Often we view our temptations and our internal conflicts as a flaw in our design, you know? Like, why is it so hard to be good?
It feels like a glitch.
Yeah, the angels are spared these painful processes of conflict, deliberation, and choice. But Dawwani is arguing that man's perfection is actually enhanced by this exact temptation.
Deliberate, agonizing resistance to evil is the only thing that gives morality actual value in his eyes.
Because man alone is a free, responsible being, that painful freedom is exactly what establishes our unique right to be the vicegerents of God.
I love that. The struggle isn't a bug in the human operating system. The struggle is the entire feature. It is the proving ground.
But how do we actually survive that proving ground? Dawwani introduces this concept of mature wisdom, or hikmati baliyah.
And he uses it to push back against the old Socratic idea, actually.
Oh, how so?
Well, Socrates basically argued that if you truly know what is good, you will naturally do what is good. Ignorance is the only cause of evil.
Which, if we look around, seems a bit overly optimistic.
Highly optimistic. Dawwani looks at human nature and says, that's naive. We know it's good and we do the bad thing anyway, all the time.
We definitely do.
So mature wisdom has to be an unbreakable blend of theory and practice.
Yes, and this mature wisdom, this combined knowing and doing, can be acquired through two distinct but harmonious paths in his system. The first is through intellectual insight, which is the path of the philosopher. The second is through mystic intuition, the path of the Sufi.
Once again, we see his grand synthesis in action.
Right. The philosopher knows the truth through rigorous logic, syllogisms, deduction. The mystic sees the truth through direct spiritual experience and divine grace.
The methods are radically different, but there is complete harmony between their findings. The philosopher and the mystic basically end up standing on the exact same mountaintop.
But the climb up that mountain is brutal. And here is where I have to marvel at how Dawwani interprets the path itself. Let's look back at Aristotle again for a second.
The doctrine of the mean.
Yes. Aristotle has this very famous, very rational doctrine of the mean. The idea is that virtue is always the middle path between two extremes. Courage is the mean between cowardice on one side and sheer recklessness on the other.
Generosity is the mean between being stingy and being wasteful.
Right. And Aristotle essentially says, use your reason, use prudence, and you'll find a nice, balanced middle path. It sounds very civilized and, frankly, manageable.
It sounds like a pleasant walk in a Greek garden.
It does. But Dawwani takes this idea of the middle path and raises the stakes to absolute, terrifying proportions. He says this mean is determined by divine law, not just human reason. Reason gives us the basic shape, but the actual content, the gravity of it, comes from the divine.
And because finding and actually staying on this divine path of moderation is so incredibly difficult, Dawwani doesn't use the language of a comfortable stroll down the middle of the road.
No, he goes dark.
He uses a very specific, chilling metaphor from Islamic eschatology. He identifies this path of moderation with the pulsirat, the bridge over hell.
The bridge that is famously described as being narrower than a hair and sharper than a sword.
That's the one.
Think about that contrast for a second. If Aristotle just says, hey, use some prudence, find a nice balance in life, Dawwani is practically screaming, no, it is a razor blade. And you are tightrope walking over eternal fire.
He's not messing around.
He is taking our daily mundane choices, whether to lie on a tax return, whether to snap at a coworker, whether to be selfish, and raising the stakes to literal cosmic proportions.
He does it intentionally to emphasize the immense, almost crushing difficulty of moral discipline. This isn't just about being a well-adjusted citizen who pays their taxes and waves to the neighbors. This is about the survival of the soul.
It's everything.
But crucially, he isn't a fatalist.
Yeah.
He firmly believes that all dispositions, whether you are born with a hot temper or you acquired a bad habit over time, they can be modified and changed.
So there's hope on that razor-thin bridge. You can, train your balance.
Exactly. Because you don't know in advance which of your evil dispositions will fiercely resist your attempts to change it. Reason and religion both dictate that you must exert your absolute utmost effort to modify yourself.
You can't just coast.
No coasting allowed. The Greeks were excellent at generalizing and systematizing virtue in the abstract, but Dawwani, building on earlier Muslim thinkers, was laser-focused on the practical, clinical application. He treated ethics as medicine.
How do you actually cure the spiritual diseases of the soul? And the influence of his predecessor, Tusi, is massive here. Tusi had previously rejected the deeply ascetic ethics of another giant of Islamic thought, Al-Ghazali.
Right, Ghazali went a very different route.
Yeah, Al-Ghazali, especially in his later years, was very focused on retreating from society, denying the physical world, seeking isolation just to purify the soul. But Tusi pointed out a brilliant linguistic fact. The Arabic word for man, insan, literally stems from a root meaning associating or companionship.
It's baked into our name.
Right. Man is inherently, biologically, and spiritually social. You cannot achieve your moral perfection by running away and hiding in a cave. And the physical body isn't some evil trap to be destroyed. It's a necessary instrument of the soul.
Dawwani takes that deeply pragmatic, socially oriented view from Tusi and infuses it with his Suhrawardian mysticism. He gives a heavy Quranic bias.
So he agrees we are social.
He agrees entirely that we are social creatures, but he elevates that society into a divine testing ground.
Ah, I see.
Every social interaction, every market transaction, every single conversation is a step on that bridge over hell. It is a real-time test of our divine vicegerency.
Which naturally leads us to the next massive, unavoidable question, right? If individual morality is this high-stakes tightrope walk over a blazing inferno, how on earth do you govern an entire society of people trying to walk that rope at the exact same time?
It sounds like chaos.
People are going to bump into each other. People are going to fall and try to drag others down with them. Dawwani couldn't just leave us with personal ethics. He had to translate this high-stakes internal struggle into a literal blueprint for political leadership.
Yes, because for Dawwani, politics is merely the science of civics applied to the moral project. Following Tusi, he views society's origin and function through a very structured hierarchical lens.
So what's his ideal government?
For him, monarchy is undeniably the ideal form of government. But, and this is vital to understand, he is not advocating for a tyrannical absolute monarchy where the king's whim is law. The king is viewed strictly as the second arbitrator of justice.
With the first arbitrator being the divine law.
Right,
Yeah.
correct. The divine law, the Sharia, is supreme and unalterable. The king's sole job is to administer that divine justice in the messy physical world of human affairs.
And to ensure the king does this efficiently and morally, without succumbing to his own brutish desires, Dawwani outlines 10 specific moral principles.
It functions almost like a 10 commandments for the ideal ruler.
I find this part of the source material absolutely fascinating. It reads like a medieval performance review for rulers.
That's a fun way to look at it.
And honestly, it makes you wonder how many modern leaders, whether they're presidents, prime ministers, or even corporate CEOs, would survive Dawwani's audit. Let's go through these not just as a list, but as a window into his psychology of power.
Okay, the first rule really sets the tone for everything that follows, and requires a massive psychological leap. He says the king should invariably consider himself to be the aggrieved party while deciding a case.
That is extreme radical empathy.
It is. By forcing himself into the shoes of the victim, by feeling the sting of the injustice personally, the king ensures he won't wish for the aggrieved what is abhorrent to himself.
So it kills objectivity, but in a good way.
It's designed to completely eliminate the detached, bureaucratic, or selfish rulings that plague legal systems. It forces the judge to feel the pain of the ruling.
That's powerful. Then we have Rule 2. Deliver justice quickly. He literally argues that justice delayed is justice denied. That is a phrase we still use today verbatim in our own legal systems.
Universally true.
It's an acknowledgement that a perfect ruling delivered 5 years too late is essentially worthless to a starving victim.
Right. Moving to Rule 3, Dawwani warns against indulging in sensual and physical pleasures.
No partying for the king.
No partying. And this isn't just prudishness. He warns that these pleasures will ultimately bring about the ruin of the state. Returning to his earlier psychological framework, a king who is enslaved by the desires of the brutes cannot possibly lead men to act like angels.
That makes total sense in his system.
A corrupt, pleasure-seeking king rots the moral fabric of the entire society from the top down.
Rule 4 is beautiful and, I gotta say, incredibly rare in ancient texts about kings. He says royal decisions should favor clemency and condescension.
Now we should clarify condescension here.
Yes, in older English, it didn't mean being patronizing. It meant lowering yourself to be approachable to commoners. He says the king should favor approachability and mercy rather than rashness and wrath. A king shouldn't rule by terror.
Rules 5 and 6 operate as a pair, and they offer a brilliant critique of what we would today call populism.
Oh, this is relevant.
Very. Rule 5 states that in pleasing the people, the king must seek the pleasure of God. Rule 6 states the converse. He must never seek the pleasure of the people by displeasing God.
That is the ultimate check on the mob. Think about modern politics, where everything is driven by polling data and focus groups. If the majority of the population wants to, say, persecute a minority, a populist leader just follows the mob.
Because it wins votes.
Exactly. But Dawwani says absolutely not. You cannot violate the divine law just because the crowd is cheering for it. The truth is not a democracy.
That leads directly into Rule 7, which explores the tension between strict law and human frailty. If a decision is left entirely to the king's discretion, he should render justice strictly. But if someone actively begs for mercy, Dawwani says forgiveness is better than justice.
It's a fascinating loophole for grace.
It is a space where the spirit of mercy is allowed to override the strict letter of the law, provided the guilty party has truly humbled themselves.
Rule 8 is common sense but hard to execute. The king must associate with the righteous and listen to their counsel. Essentially, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right?
Yep. If your court is full of sycophants and thieves, you will rule like a thief.
But then we hit Rule 9, which is where we really see the reality of a 15th century worldview. He says, keep everyone in their rightful place and do not entrust high office to low-born people.
Yes, this one is undeniably jarring to our modern egalitarian ears. We champion social mobility.
It sounds super elitist today.
It does, but for Dawwani, this isn't merely about aristocratic snobbery. It reflects a deeply held philosophical belief in a strictly divinely ordered universe. A universe where everything and everyone has a specific ordained slot. To put a peasant in a vizier's role wouldn't just be politically risky for him, it would be metaphysically disruptive.
Which brings us to the final rule, Rule 10. And this is arguably the heaviest burden of all. Dawwani says the king cannot just abstain from injustice himself, he must conduct the affairs of the state so that no one under his authority is guilty of injustice.
The chain of accountability is absolute.
It really is. Think about where you work if you're listening to this. Imagine if your CEO was held spiritually, morally, and legally responsible if a regional middle manager halfway across the country fudged their expense reports or mistreated an employee.
It would be terrifying to be CEO.
That's the level of accountability Dawwani is demanding. If a local tax collector in a distant province takes a bribe, Dawwani says the king is morally culpable. It's a staggering, almost impossible level of delegated responsibility. How could one man bear that?
It seems impossible until you look at the mechanics of Dawwani's metaphysics, his cosmology. Just as his politics require an impossibly rigid, perfect order, his universe is rigidly, perfectly ordered.
Okay, lay out the universe for us.
Building on Tusi and the philosophers before him, Dawwani's cosmology relies on the concept of emanation. He envisions a universe composed of 10 intellects, 9 celestial spheres, 4 physical elements, and the 3 kingdoms of nature, mineral, vegetative, and animal.
Okay, we need to slow down here. Whenever medieval philosophy gets into spheres and emanations, it's really easy to just hear a bunch of mystical jargon. What actually is an emanation, and what does this cosmic map look like?
Think of emanation like a waterfall of reality. At the very top, you have God, the singular infinite source. But God is so pure, so unified, that he cannot directly interact with the messy, fragmented physical world. So reality emanates or overflows from God.
Like a fountain spilling over?
Exactly. The first thing to pour out is the first intellect. Dawwani identifies this first intellect with the original essence of the Prophet Muhammad.
So this first intellect is like the blueprint for everything that will ever exist.
Exactly that. It contains the idea of all things past, present, and future. Imagine it as a seed that potentially contains the roots, branches, leaves, and fruit of a massive tree.
Okay, I'm with you.
From this first intellect, reality continues to cascade downward, hitting a series of existential rocks, if you will, which are the subsequent intellects in the 9 celestial spheres of the Ptolemaic universe. The spheres of Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, the Moon. At each level, the emanation becomes a little less unified, a little more physical.
Until it finally crashes down into the muddy pool at the bottom, which is our physical Earth, made of the 4 elements: earth, water, air, and fire.
Yes. But there is a crucial bridge. The 10th intellect, which is associated with the lowest celestial sphere, the moon, is called the active intellect.
The active intellect.
This active intellect is the ultimate bridge between heaven and earth. The heavenly spheres literally control the destiny of the material world. As they revolve, first situations come into being on earth. Every single moment, the active intellect causes a new form to exist and reflect itself in our elemental matter.
Okay, so the universe is basically a giant cosmic mirror reflecting divine ideas down into physical reality. And the source mentions something deeply poetic about how Dawwani views physical motion. He says motion is just a shadow of divine motion.
This is one of his most profound mystical insights. He says the reality of that first intellect passes down through all the spheres, enters the mineral state, grows into the vegetative state, evolves into the animal state, and finally awakens in man as acquired intellect.
It comes full circle.
Exactly. So the highest possible point of reality coalesces with the lowest, completing a massive circle of being with an arc of descent and an arc of ascent. Therefore, all the physical motion we see, a tree growing, a rock falling, the planet spinning, even the movement of human thought, is just a shadow of divine motion.
And where does that divine motion come from?
It stems entirely from God's love for self-expression. In his mystic terminology, Dawwani calls it the flashing of self upon self.
The flashing of self upon self. That is incredible phrasing. So, to tie this all back to his 10 rules for kings, the reason the king is held completely responsible for everything is because the state is a miniature version of the universe.
A perfect parallel.
Just as the cosmos is perfectly ordered, flowing down seamlessly from that first intellect through the spheres to the earth, human society must be perfectly ordered, flowing down seamlessly from the ideal king through his ministers to the peasants. It's a fractal universe. The macrocosm of the spinning heavens is directly reflected in the microcosm of the political state.
You've captured the absolute essence of his worldview there. And in his metaphysical treatise, Al-Zawra, he actually evaluates the 3 great paths of knowledge: theology, philosophy, and mysticism.
And which one wins?
While he appreciates all 3 and actively uses them, he ultimately concludes that mysticism is superior. Philosophy can give you the ordered structure of the spheres and the intellects, sure, but mysticism is free from doubt because it relies on direct divine grace. It allows the soul to actually experience that flashing of self upon self. It is nearer to prophethood.
So Dawwani gives us this breathtaking, mystical, highly ordered vision of what society ought to be. a society of humans trying to act like angels, walking a razor-thin tightrope over hell, led by an empathetic, flawless king who perfectly reflects the divine order of the stars.
It is an incredibly beautiful vision.
It really is. But, I mean, let's be real. When you look at actual human history, when has a society of flawed, selfish humans ever actually achieved that? Kings are often corrupt, societies collapse, people steal bread to survive. Dawwani's system is, at the end of the day, an ideal.
It is entirely an ideal and a fragile one when exposed to the brutal realities of history.
Which brings us to the ultimate pivot of this deep dive. Someone had to look at all this soaring idealism, look at the actual dirt and blood of history and say, we need a science for what humans actually do, not just what they should do.
We need a reality check.
Exactly. Did anyone during this era actually study the dirty reality of history? And the answer is a resounding yes. Enter our second thinker, Ibn Khaldun, who brings us a revolutionary paradigm shift.
Ibn Khaldun is the perfect, necessary counterpoint to Dawwani. Today, he is deeply admired worldwide. He is widely recognized as one of the absolute founders of sociology, demography, and the philosophy of history.
He's a giant.
But what's crucial to understand about his context is that his contemporaries did not view him as a traditional philosopher in the way they viewed figures like Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, or even Dawwani. He didn't write traditional abstract treatises on logic or the celestial spheres.
Because he's doing something entirely new. He's looking at human data. But modern scholars often make an assumption here. They assume that because Khaldun invented a new empirical social science, he must have been actively revolting against traditional Muslim philosophy. They picture him as this rebel trying to tear down the Aristotelian establishment.
That's a very common narrative.
But our source text asks a really critical question. Did he actually revolt against philosophy?
And the text's answer, based on Khaldun's own words, is a resounding no. To understand what Khaldun thought he was doing, we have to look at how he fundamentally divided the study of history. He said history has an external aspect and an internal aspect.
Okay, what's the external?
The external aspect is just the surface facts, the who, what, when, and where. It's the raw information about past events, battles, and kings.
Right. The dates and names you memorize for a high school history test and then immediately forget.
Exactly that. But the internal aspect is contemplation, verification, and a precise causal explanation of things. It's the why and the how. Why did this specific empire fall while that one thrived? How does a nomadic tribe transform into a sedentary, luxury-loving dynasty?
The actual mechanics of it.
Yes. Khaldun argued that this internal aspect is a profound, rigorous science of the qualities and causes of events. Therefore, he explicitly claimed it is a firm and principal part of wisdom or philosophy.
So he's not saying philosophy is dead, I'm doing science. He's saying I'm not destroying philosophy, I'm claiming a massive unexplored new territory for it.
Yes. He makes a strict distinction between the legal or transmitted sciences, which are based on divine law, scripture, and specific to the Islamic religious community, and the philosophic or natural rational sciences, which anyone of any culture can understand through pure human thought and perception.
Like math and physics.
Right. These philosophic sciences, which they inherited from the Greeks, traditionally included logic, mathematics, physics, and metaphysics. Khaldun firmly places his new work squarely within this Aristotelian tradition of rational sciences.
So I have to ask you, and the listener, to consider the ultimate historical flex here. Did Khaldun realize he was inventing a completely new field, what we now call sociology? Or did he genuinely believe he was just doing better physics than the philosophers who came before him?
It's a brilliant question, and the evidence points to a bit of both. He fully recognized that no philosopher before him, not Plato with his Republic, not Aristotle with his Politics, not the great Muslim masters like Farabi, had elaborated a true science of human association using the strict empirical methods of natural science.
He knew he was the first.
He did, and he was actually quite surprised by this omission. He felt he was filling a glaring gap in the natural sciences using the very tools Aristotle had left behind. He was applying the rigor of physics to the messiness of history.
He's basically looking at the ancient masters and saying, you guys missed a spot, and it happens to be the entirety of human history and culture.
Pretty much.
So to understand how Khaldun turned history from a collection of campfire stories and royal propaganda into a rigorous, predictive science, we have to look at the exact mechanism he invented. He called it the science of ʿumrān, which translates roughly to human culture or civilization.
He lays the foundation for this entirely new science in his masterwork, the Muqaddimah, which simply means introduction, and in Book 1 of his massive universal history, Kitab al-Ibar. His primary motivation was intensely practical, born out of sheer frustration.
Frustration with what?
He wanted to find a foolproof rule, a reliable yardstick, to distinguish truth from falsehood in historical reports.
Because historians at the time were making massive, embarrassing errors, right? They're just writing down whatever they heard from travelers or kings without filtering it at all.
Precisely. Khaldun realized that these historians were making these wild errors because they didn't understand the fundamental nature of the states of culture. They didn't know what was actually biologically, physically, or economically possible.
They lacked a baseline of reality.
Yes. He argued that if you know the natural laws that govern human society, you can instantly tell if a historical report is a fake, just by examining whether it violates those natural laws.
It's essentially an intellectual lie detector test. Let's think about how this works. It's like a detective walking into a crime scene. You have an unreliable witness who says, "I saw the suspect flap his arms and fly out the third-story window."
Right.
Khaldun is the detective who says gravity exists, it is an unbreakable natural law, therefore humans cannot fly. Therefore, your historical report is false. I don't care if 100 people swear they saw it.
That is a perfect illustration of his method.
But the genius of Khaldun is that he isn't just applying this to physical gravity. He's applying this exact same logic to economics, politics, group solidarity, and complex human behavior.
He is declaring that history isn't just a random sequence of events directed by the whims of kings or gods. History is a generated thing, a living organism governed by laws of nature, just as strict as gravity. But this raises a technical question. Why did he classify this lie detector test as a natural science, specifically? Why not logic or math?
Yeah, if it's a tool for calculating truth, why isn't it classified under mathematics?
It all comes down to the subject matter. He accepts Aristotle's logic, but logic is just a mental tool, an organon, to prevent the mind from making errors when abstracting concepts. It doesn't study actual physical things in the real world.
And math.
Mathematics deals theoretically or practically with abstract measurements and quantities.
Yeah.
But natural science, physics, in the Aristotelian sense, studies actual bodies, generation, corruption, and the soul.
It studies things that are born, grow, decay, and die. And since human association is a natural property of man...
Yes. Since man is a rational being with a soul and a physical body subject to generation and corruption, studying society is essentially studying the natural physics of human behavior. Society is born, it grows, it decays, and it dies. It is the study of a specific generated thing, human culture.
Okay, but to make this sociological lie detector test work, to build a science of history based on physics, Khaldun needed unquestionable foundational rules.
He needed axioms.
Right. In logic, a premise upon which a proof depends is called a Muqaddimah. It's no coincidence that's the title of his famous introduction. Khaldun laid out exactly 6 of these premises to build his sociological matrix. These are the 6 pillars of human culture.
This is where it gets incredibly practical.
This is where his theory hits the dirt, and where he completely breaks away from Dawwani's soaring idealism. Let's dig into these 6 pillars.
The first pillar, the first absolute premise, is that association is necessary. Now, traditional philosophers like Aristotle and Tusi said man is political by nature, implying a moral or rational drive to form cities. But Khaldun subtly yet radically shifts this. He says association is necessary for a completely different reason, not because of some high-minded moral pursuit, but simply because man is physically weak.
Wait, I have to vigorously react to this. Dawwani just spent our whole first half telling us that we form society so we can achieve the vicegerency of God. We are associating so we can help each other walk a tightrope to heaven. And Khaldun swoops in and says, no, we have society so a lion doesn't eat us.
That is exactly the brutal, pragmatic shift.
It completely strips away all the romanticism of human civilization. He's looking at our grand cities, our complex laws, our beautiful architecture, and saying it all exists simply because a single human being cannot possibly gather enough food to survive or defend themselves alone against predators with sharper claws. It's biological survival, not ethical perfection.
It is starkly, uncompromisingly biological. He grounds human association entirely in our animal nature. We have the exact same needs for nourishment and defense as other animals, but we are physically deficient compared to top predators. We don't have fangs, we don't have thick hides.
We're soft and squishy.
Very squishy. We need each other, and we need to invent tools, weapons, and agriculture just to continue existing. He relies heavily on the physical examinations of human organs by Galen, the great ancient physician, and the philosopher's biological writings to prove this point.
So no ethics involved.
He deliberately ignores the ethical extensions the philosopher's trying to add. He wants a sociology, not a morality play.
Wow. Okay, so pillar one is just raw biological survival. But if step one is just huddling together so the lions don't get us, that still doesn't explain the vast diversity of human cultures. Why does a society in the desert look and act completely differently from one in the snowy mountains? There has to be an environmental variable here. What is premise two?
You're exactly right. Which brings us to the distribution of culture. This second premise is purely geographical. It is based on the astronomy and physical science of his time, specifically Ptolemy's geography.
Okay, setting the map.
Khaldun studies the spherical shape of the Earth, the generation of plants and animals, and divides the Earth into 7 habitable zones based on latitude. Geography and temperature brutally dictate where humans can actually live and form these necessary associations. You can't build a massive agricultural empire in the frozen tundra.
So environment is destiny, part one. Next time you look at a map of human history, remember Khaldun is saying the map drew the history, not the humans. Which brings us to premise three, climate and physical traits.
Yes. Here he argues that the intense heat and cold of the atmosphere dictate human skin color, as well as the arts, tools, and modes of life in different regions. He strictly relies on natural philosophy, the nature of elements, generation, and corruption.
He's looking for biological causes.
Yes. What's brilliant here is how he aggressively mocks and rejects genealogists who try to explain skin color through mythical family lineages or ancient biblical curses, completely ignoring biology. He prefers the medical texts of Ibn Sina to explain these physical traits rationally. Dark skin, for Khaldun, isn't a curse or a lineage. It is simply a biological adaptation to intense sun.
It's so empirical. He is telling his contemporaries, stop talking about curses and myths, look at the temperature of the air. But he doesn't stop at physical traits. Premise 4 takes this environmental determinism into psychology, climate, and character.
This is where his theory gets highly deterministic and fascinatingly strange to modern ears. He argues that heat expands the animal spirit in humans, which directly causes gladness, excitability, and levity in the population.
So he's saying people in hot climates are literally physically forced by the air temperature to be more excitable and joyful.
According to the medical physics of his day, yes. We need to understand the concept of spirit, or pneuma, in ancient medicine. It wasn't a ghost. It was considered a fine, vaporous substance in the blood.
Like a gas.
Khaldun argues that heat expands the air, which expands this vaporous spirit within the body, leading to joy and levity. Conversely, cold contracts the spirit, leading to sadness, foresight, and anxiety about the future.
That's a huge generalization.
It is, but what is interesting is his intellectual independence here. He outright rejects the esteemed medical opinion of Galen and later Muslim historians like al-Masudi, who tried to argue that this levity in hot climates was due to a biological weakness of the brain. Khaldun says no, it's not a weak brain, it's just the natural, unavoidable physics of heat and gas.
That is wild. He's reducing personality traits and cultural stereotypes to literal thermodynamics inside the blood. But it gets even crazier and more deterministic with premise 5, food and character.
Khaldun argues that the abundance or scarcity of food, and specifically the moisture it contains, directly affects the human stomach and the body's humors.
The moisture?
Yes. This moisture dictates the physical delicacy or coarseness of the body. But he goes further, making a huge sociological leap. He argues that this physical state of the stomach actually shapes a society's habits of character, their ability to learn, and even their piety and religion.
Stop. The moisture in your food determines your piety.
He claims this natural causal explanation is based on extensive observation and confirmed by agricultural realities. Nomadic people who eat sparse, dry food are physically tougher and, in his view, often more naturally pious and clear-headed.
And city people.
City dwellers who gorge on moist, complex, luxurious foods become physically soft, intellectually corrupt, and morally weak. The physical intake alters the body, which fundamentally alters the mind's disposition toward religious practice and moral discipline.
Dawwani must be spinning in his grave. Dawwani spent all this time telling us that piety is this heroic, agonizing exertion of the divine intellect over the brutish desires. It's the bridge over hell. Khaldun looks at that and says, actually, you're just failing the test because you eat too much moist porridge. Check your diet.
It's biological reductionism at its peak.
The reductionism is just breathtaking. But surely in the medieval Islamic world, he has to leave room for the divine when it comes to the prophets, right? Premise 6 is about perceiving the unseen, prophecy. How does the pragmatist explain miracles?
Even here, tackling the most sacred topic, Khaldun remains ruthlessly empirical and grounded in natural science. He does acknowledge the reality of prophecy, dream visions, and soothsaying. He notes the traditional signs of a prophet good character, miracles, conveying messages from heaven.
Oh, he believed in them.
He does. But when he explains the true meaning and the actual mechanism of prophecy, he relies entirely on the natural architecture of the human soul and the physical brain.
How does he explain a miracle naturally without it just being God breaking the rules of physics?
He decisively sides with the philosophers over the theologians on this. The theologians argue that miracles happen directly by the arbitrary power of God, suspending the laws of nature for a moment. Khaldun says no, nature's laws aren't suspended.
So how do they happen?
Instead, the prophetic soul has essential, natural, biological properties.
Yeah.
It possesses a power so incredibly concentrated and great that the physical elements of the world simply obey it naturally. The miracle emanates from the prophet's own naturally endowed biological power, interacting with the physics of the world.
And how does the revelation itself work? How does a human brain receive a message from the angels?
He maps it physically. He traces it up through the physical powers of the body, the external senses like sight and hearing, passing the data to the internal senses like imagination and memory, all ascending to the power of thought. And he physically locates this power of thought in the middle hollow or ventricle of the physical brain.
Very specific anatomical location.
This power constantly longs to move from pure potentiality into action. In extremely rare individuals' prophets, this soul has a primary, original natural disposition, a biological mutation almost, that allows it to briefly pass over from human nature to the angelic nature.
Wait, so it's a mutation?
It's not unpredictable magic. It's an extreme, rare biological and psychological capacity acting upon the elements.
It's like he's describing the soul as a muscle. And in a prophet, that muscle is just naturally, biologically strong enough to lift the veil of reality. He takes absolutely everything Dawwani would attribute to divine grace or moral failing, piety, gladness, prophetic revelation, and reduces them to heat, moisture, diets, and the physical structure of the brain's hollows.
The implication of this shift is massive. Khaldun's entire sociological science presupposes that the conclusions of natural philosophy, of biology and physics, are absolute fact. He didn't build a new science out of thin air. He took the existing physics, biology, and geography of his day and built the first true sociology strictly on environmental and biological determinism.
Because he's not trying to preach.
He doesn't need ethical premises because his goal isn't to tell people how to be good. His goal is to figure out why societies rise, fall, and behave the way they do so he can verify historical truth.
It is the ultimate shift from ought to is. We have seen two entirely different monumental blueprints for humanity today. Dawwani synthesized philosophy and mysticism to teach us that humans are uniquely positioned in the cosmos. We alone have the terrifying privilege of choosing intellect over base desire, aiming for this divine perfection, walking that razor-thin bridge over hell. He demands that we look up at the angels.
And in stark contrast, Ibn Khaldun synthesized history and natural science to teach us that our societies, our moods, our empires, and even our religions are profoundly shaped by our physical environment, our biological need to survive, the temperature of our climate, and the food in our stomachs. He forces us to look down at the dirt and realize that we are born from it.
And I think there's a profound relevance to you, the listener, right now.
Yes.
Think about how you consume information. When you open your phone and read the news, whether it's about a political crisis, a war, or an economic collapse, how are you reading it?
That's a great question to ask.
Are you reading it like Dawwani? Are you looking for the moral arc, judging the ideal justice of leaders, expecting people to overcome their base nature and do the right thing? Or are you reading it like Khaldun? Are you looking for the underlying environmental, economic, and systemic causes that practically force groups of people to act the way they do, regardless of morality?
It is the fundamental difference between judging history and understanding its mechanics. Both perspectives are incredibly powerful tools for analyzing the world. And perhaps a truly complete worldview requires holding both of them in tension.
I completely agree, but I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought, something that builds on this clash of titans. If Ibn Khaldun is right, if our character, our joy, and even our capacity for piety are heavily dictated by the climate we live in and the moisture in the food we eat, what happens to Dawwani's ultimate moral test?
That's the big question.
If that terrifying bridge over hell is made narrower or wider simply by the temperature of the city you were born in or the diet you can afford, how much free will do we actually have to walk it? Are we angels in training or just highly complex animals reacting to the weather? Something for you to chew on until our next deep dive.